That's the galaxy. It's dark, with a few pinpricks of light.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and let's talk about the finale of Skeleton Crew. I thought about it, and I think I now know the secret to a successful Star Wars story, and spoiler alert, this show nailed it. I'm also so jazzed that Star Wars can now move into new genres. We got a kids show, so what's next? An underworld film? A family living room drama? The possibilities are so vast that I'm going to talk to Adam Lance Garcia and Heather Antos to get their thoughts later on. And remember guys, Monday and Wednesday next week, the ScreenCrush store is coming to Dallas and Houston for a special live show with exclusive breakdowns, special guests, and the nerdiest meet and greet you have ever seen. Ticket links are below. Now, let's talk about this finale. I know this show has like low-ish views, but I think people are really going to come around and discover it. Right now, maybe there's just been too much Star Wars, and it needs to be more rare so it will feel special again. So I don't blame people for taking a break, but I do think we've also fallen into this trap of thinking, oh well, what do I need to see? Like Star Wars and Marvel have become homework for people. They only want to see the projects that they think they have to see in order to understand the big picture. Skeleton Crew maybe doesn't seem as vital to the story as, say, the Ahsoka TV show, so fewer people watch it. But sometimes, guys, we need to watch a show simply because it's a great show. Skeleton Crew was filled with all those Easter eggs that we love, mentions of the Old Republic and the Jedi, or even how the first episode's opening sequence mirrored the opening of A New Hope. But those kinds of Easter eggs are more subtle little nods. If you're a huge fan, you might catch them. But if you're a casual fan, you're not going to be confused.
Best of both worlds.
Whereas, if you're a casual Star Wars fan who only watched the movies and The Mandalorian, you would have had no idea what was happening in the show Ahsoka. I think the best Star Wars should be inclusive and shouldn't gatekeep fans with too much backstory. But I also think that Skeleton Crew is exactly what Star Wars needs. It's a simple story that puts character first. Now, this show had a simple premise.
Yeah, I mean, every character was based on one of the Goonies.
Yes, it's the Goonies in space, but beneath that, it has themes about adulthood and coming of age, and it asks what kind of society do we want to build for ourselves. It's also a commentary on how our own lives are run by algorithms and machines. I mean, it's not an accident that At-Aten looks very much like a modern suburban neighborhood, because the adults in the show are actually stand-ins for us. See, the original Star Wars was a metaphor for the counterculture movement of the 1960s taking down the establishment. And this show is a metaphor for how we're all caught up in the cycle of TikTok and algorithms and AI automation, and that maybe we just need to stop and unplug and look up and see the stars. But I love that that message was not heavy-handed. They really took their time. They gave us pieces of the puzzle in every episode until everything fell into place in the finale. So the revelation in this episode that the At-Aten society was run by machines didn't surprise me at all. I mean, we've been predicting that for weeks now.
I was right!
But I appreciated how this was also a sly commentary on the world we live in today.
What do you mean? Are we being ruled by robots? Resist!
Well, no, we're not being ruled by robots, but we are letting our worldview be dictated by algorithms. We're all locked into whatever social media we use, which caters to exactly the news we want to hear. But this actually only benefits the giant media companies that own these websites, who are all always just trying to up engagement for higher ad revenue. So if you would like to cut through the bias and hear the real news, I recommend Ground News. They're the sponsor of this video. I use Ground News every day. I like it so much, I actually subscribed on my own. Ground News is an app and website that gathers related articles from across the world into one place. But they give you the context about the source's political leaning, their reliability, and most importantly, their ownership. This means that you can see through the bias and think critically about the news you consume. For instance, here's a story about Trump trying to block Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's full report on him. Now, I can see that there are 10 sources, 3 right, 3 left, and 3 center. I can see each source, how they lean, and like I said, who owns them. And I noticed though that right and center sources simply stated that Trump asked the Supreme Court to block the report, while 2 of the left-leaning sources editorialized and said that he begged the Supreme Court. See, I want to know that the news isn't trying to sway me one way or the other. So they even have a blind spot section that shows you news stories that each side is ignoring. For instance, this story talks about how Trump's team doesn't know how they will end the war in Ukraine. But then there's this story about how 15,000 healthcare professionals urged the Senate to reject RFK Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. These are stories that were being ignored by one side or the other. Ground News is an incredible resource, and I've been looking for a service like Ground News for years, so I highly encourage you to check them out. If you go to groundnews.com/Airy, ScreenCrush.sc or click this QR code, you'll get 40% off their Vantage plan, which includes unlimited access to every feature. Your subscription will not only help out this channel, but you'll also be helping to support an independent platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. Now, back to Skeleton Crew. This story could have technically taken place in a number of different universes or eras. It could be modern day or a fantasy story. But on the other hand, it was uniquely Star Wars.
What do you mean?
Well, go back to Jod's monologue.
I was living in a hole in the ground, and a Jedi found me.
In just a few sentences, we can see this guy's past. We see a scared, starving kid. We see the Jedi in hiding, reaching out her hand to him. We see this kid being given hope. But then
They hunted her down, and they made me watch whilst they killed her.
that hope was taken away. We're still seeing the traumatizing effects of Order 66 and the rise of the Empire. I think this show is comparable to Andor because it gave us the perspective of these people on the ground. Like, think back to the original Star Wars. I'll tell you the one scene that really sold the premise of the franchise, and it's not the opening chase or Obi-Wan explaining the Force. The movie opens with the Empire appearing in these scary masks, but we don't really know anything about this government. Like, this was the 1970s, where sci-fi always had a twist, so it could have turned out that this pretty rebel was actually a terrorist and that the evil Darth Vader was simply a burn victim doing what he thought was right. Although I guess that is kind of true.
From a certain point of view.
But then, in one brilliant scene, we find out what the Empire is all about when they murder Owen and Beru. Like, this scene is brutal. This was a kid's movie and we see burned out corpses. This showed the devastation that the Empire brings on a small scale, and it made it feel more human for the rest of us. And this show also gave us that small scale human element that is central to Star Wars. Yes, Jedi and space wizards and clones, but also a boy who misses his mother. And I think this sort of grounding is what the sequel trilogy lacked. We never got that perspective of ordinary people suffering at the hands of the First Order. I mean, we had Broom Kid, but he was suffering at the hands of evil capitalists and not a space dictatorship.
Yeah, but they blew up a planet.
Well, 5 planets, but we never really see anybody react to that. We don't know the people and the explosion is over in just a second. Whereas, you can see the deaths of Alderaan all over Carrie Fisher's face. There is a real human connection to the pain, which brings me back to Skeleton Crew. Jod's monologue is devastating. Now, if you have seen Revenge of the Sith or Obi-Wan Kenobi, then you have all this added weight to his story. But if you haven't seen those, then it still works. You understand that this is a guy who has been through some pain, and that pain twisted him and made him evil.
That's the galaxy. It's dark, with a few pinpricks of light.
We got to see At-Aten and feel their way of life, so it means something when the pirates come along and attack them. And just a few episodes before, we saw the stakes of this battle. We saw At-Akron destroyed by greed and tribalism. This set the stakes for the final battle, but most importantly, I just cared about these kids. They each had their own strengths and weaknesses that were able to shine in the finale. And like we talked about in our Easter egg video, the show did a beautiful job of summarizing the theme of Star Wars, that the youth can rise up and create change, or as George Lucas put it,
You know, it's a film for 12-year-olds.
this series was so much like Andor because they both spent a lot of time with real people. Almost half of Andor is about the people of Ferrix, so we understand their culture. We know what's at stake if the Empire erases their way of life. And this kind of tactile connection to people is what shows like Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka lacked. So those shows, to me, felt like they were not about people, they were about action figures. But hey, let's stay positive and talk about Skeleton Crew, and a little later, I'll tell you what kind of Star Wars project I really want to see next. But I want to talk to two of my favorite Star Wars storytellers in existence. We have Adam Lance Garcia and Heather Antos, who is group editor of licensing at IDW. You've both worked on Star Wars stories before, so I want to get your thoughts first on what you thought of Skeleton Crew. I think I have a pretty good indicator already, but then I want to hear, now that we've opened up the genre door, later I want you to tell me what kind of Star Wars story you would like to see told next, or that you personally would like to tell next. So first of all, Heather, let's start with you. 8 episodes, one and done, Skeleton Crew finished. What are your thoughts on the series?
Overall, I quite enjoyed it. You know, I think if I had any major critiques, I think there was one episode, either episode 3 or 4, that I don't think really mattered in the long term of the overarching plot, that you could do without. Whatever one where they're on that planet with the multiple tribes and kneel over Caden spheres.
I disagree. I thought that was fundamentally important to show you the stakes of the final battle, but that's just me.
For me. You know, it didn't hook me in. But overall, I thought it was really, really great. And I think one of the key points of that is the fact that it was about these characters and their story and didn't try to monumentally impact the larger Star Wars universe. Yes, it informed a lot of things and gave us a lot of cool lore tidbits to connect and all of that here and there, but you didn't have to do any homework for this. And the acting was great. The kids were so good in this. I'm not the biggest Jude Law fan personally, but I think he gave one heck of a performance in this. And overall, it was really, really, really quite enjoyable. I would love to see more with these characters in this world.
You bring up a good point about putting the world building first. And it reminds me of like the early drafts of Star Wars, which was, Adam, help me out with the title. The Journey of
it was like the Avengers
Sky Killer, Star Killer.
Star Killer, yeah.
It was like, yeah, Anakin Star Killer, like
from the Journal of the Wills, Part 1, the Star Wars. Yeah, like... And it was the crystal and all this like stuff in it and all this world building and vast comic book. And then, even in the edit process, his 3 editors pared it down to the story about people, which is what I talked about earlier. So I agree with you 100%. The less world building, the more focus on actual humans or aliens, the better. Adam, what about you? What are your thoughts here after the finale of Skeleton Crew?
This show really took me by surprise. Like Andor, it was the show I was least excited about. I was just like, who wants this? Who needs this? And I was wrong both times. I think that it's such a good example of what I want to see more of from Star Wars, which are these sort of standalone stories sort of set to the side that help build up the universe, that are just fun and exciting. I'm going to agree with everything Heather said. The kids were great. Jude Law was great. I love that the only connection to the wider canon was a random pirate that I don't even remember his name of. I've definitely been recommending to people who are Star Wars novices. I'm just like, just watch this. You don't need to know anything. You can just, all you need to know, it takes place after Return of the Jedi, and that's it. And it was just so much fun. I was giddy the entire time. I mean, I went in with every hesitation and no expectations. And by the time I was at the end of the season finale, I was laughing, I was clapping, I was just in the moment with the story, and at no point was I sitting and thinking like, well, how is this going to connect to this story or that story?
I want to, by the way, just parrot everything, Adam. You guys seem like you're on the same page as far as like character first, which seems like, it would be storytelling 101, but there have been some Star Wars shows, I think, that just assumed that we knew the characters too well, where they maybe should have done a little bit more, not just for novices, but for people who are experienced, because like we haven't seen Boba Fett in a while. Why does he want crime? Like Heather, we talked about that all the time during our Boba Fett videos.
Why does he want crime?
Why not?
Yeah, why not do the
Why
crime?
not?
Why walk to town so much when you have jetpack? Explain, please. So
They fly now?
They fly now. Looking like, just to pair what Adam said about putting character first and like where world building goes, I thought Skeleton Crew, when I first heard about it, was like, oh cool, that's going to show the crime aspect and the pirate aspect. And it's interesting that we have touched on that in a few different projects, but Lucasfilm has really not done a big deep dive into that world yet, but they can. I think they've left the door open. They've shown a glimpse of that world. As far as like how this fits in the greater Star Wars saga, do you think this does like a good job of laying a foundation that the next creator can come and build upon?
I definitely think so. They definitely opened a whole batch of questions with this, like not only the pirates, right, and this whole world that we still, like you said, have touched on, but haven't really got to explore too much. There's definitely a novel in there. There's definitely comic series in there. There's definitely opportunity for video game exploration and stuff like that in there that I think would do really, really well. On top of like, if should they do like more Skeleton Crew or another TV show, but they also opened this really interesting political infrastructure of the supervisor being this almost like, I don't want to say AI, but like this robot running the planet with the great work. Yeah. I immediately thought Fallout a little bit for how the bunkers are ran, but it did lean a little bit on the edge of too sci-fi for me personally when it comes to Star Wars, but I would love to know more about how that robot running this planet was constructed or built. Are there more planets like this that do this across the galaxy? It definitely was a twist that I didn't see coming necessarily, and I would love to know more about the behind the scenes development of that in particular, and how internally like Story Group and those folks see that fitting into the larger Star Wars story.
Interesting. It's interesting to hear you didn't see that coming, because it's the one thing that I got right, was predicting that it was going to be a droid. And Adam, earlier I talked about how, in addition to how that opens up like a lot of cool ideas, for like Landru, but in Star Wars, it opens up a lot of cool ideas for storytelling. But also, I talked earlier about how, the original Star Wars trilogy was very obviously a metaphor for the counterculture. The prequel trilogy is also a metaphor for the fall of a culture and, where we were at that particular time, post 9/11. And I think you could say the sequel trilogy in a meta sense is a metaphor for our self-referential culture. But this show, very sneaky, was a commentary on AI and algorithms controlling our life. Do you think that was an effective metaphor?
I think it was. I think that's the thing that I really appreciate about the show in holistically is that it can touch upon those really big, deep themes, but still be accessible to literally every audience. I feel like kids can watch it and appreciate what it is, but I'm still coming away with like, oh, well, to your point, like this is about AI, about algorithms, how we're sort of like just being comfortable with the system. You touched upon that in your Easter egg videos. Like there's a lot of meat there. And to an earlier point, and you mentioned it, Heather mentioned it, it opens narrative doors. I think that's the thing that I really want to see more of in just Star Wars in general. It's like what I love about the High Republic, what I loved about Skeleton Crew, what I loved about Andor, what I love about a lot of the sort of expanded media, what I loved about the expanded universe back when I was reading it as a kid, is that it always opened doors. The more content you put in, it should be adding more context that opens up these narrative doors. You don't want to close doors. You don't want to you want to answer questions, but like Skeleton Crew did a great job of like every question it answered, it raised another question. Mm-hmm. And there's so many things that where we're coming out of the series thinking like, well, what happened to Jod? Like we know just enough. That's interesting. We can sort of like, the audience wants to kind of explore more about that. They want to learn more about AT-AT, and they want to learn more about the Old Republic and the droid that like is running these planets.
Well, and so love or hate the sequel trilogy, you have to admit they didn't give room for many new stories. I mean, the first two movies take place one after the other, and then there's only a year gap afterwards.
Yeah.
Sorry, Heather.
I was going to say that was quite intentional with the sequel trilogy. But one of the major things, and we touched on this a little bit, that I really do love about Jod, about the kids, about the parents, they're all just some guy, everyone was waiting for the big reveal that Jod was going to be, left at Order 66, like some Padawan or just a Jedi in training, or like all of these things. And there's a bigger impact, or maybe there's a dark side twist, or maybe there's an Empire twist, or. And he's not. He's just, as you said, Adam, they gave us just enough to know that he was just some guy who went through some shit. But, and the parents were just regular people who were scared.
And I think his monologue did a great job of showing us that he did want to be good. A part of him did still want that. And I thought that was a great way to show.
Yeah,
it was great. And it was just, I know I complained in a previous episode we didn't get enough of his backstory, but, that's the backstory we needed, that monologue.
It's unnecessary.
And I think he delivered it so well. So, given that this series showed us, hey, you can do a Goonies space adventure, right? You're both storytellers. I want to know, what kind of Star Wars genre leap would you like to see next, right? Heather, what about you? Where would you like to see this?
I would really love, and this I think just is kind of just where I am with storytelling in general right now across comics or TV or anything. But I would love to see Star Wars take on MASH.
Ooh, okay.
Right? Give us more of a serialized show.
About doctors in a war?
Or, just military, military in a war, it could be the doctors. I personally working at Star Trek right now. I'm very into the doctors in the medical department on those ships. But I think, that is one element of the rebellion that we've never really touched on, there's all of these military, and even with the Empire, right? There's these big military doing battles, and we've never really stepped a toe into the medical side of that. And I think
It is also a civil war. You think back, like some of the best stories about the American Civil War, about the division within families and two brothers end up on two different sides. You could do things like that too.
Yeah.
That'd be really interesting.
I think, yeah.
Adam? Oh, go ahead.
I was
Sorry.
just saying, I just feel like it's such a natural transition and area to develop story that don't need to necessarily be, you know, super CGI heavy or like things like that as well. That could do really, really well on like a Disney Plus television format.
Yeah, plus war has a lot of downtime, and downtime's not expensive, so you could show these guys, you know, like cleaning their bunks.
The human elements, yeah.
Adam, exactly, that human element I was talking about earlier. Adam, what about you? What's your Star Wars genre leap you want to see next?
What I want to see more of is two things, and you can sort of argue that Star Wars has already done this, but one is Westerns, and I'm not talking the B-movie serial Westerns, which are sort of at the core of what Star Wars is now. I'm talking about the sort of John Ford, those really classic movies, John Wayne, the stuff that sort of defined an era, not the sort of, you know, Republic serials, which I love, mind you. Like, I love the old Republic serials. I grew up on the old Republic serials. But there's that sort of classic Western that we don't really get to see and explore in Star Wars. And the other,
and a Western doesn't have to be told in a desert landscape. That's just for the American. Roadhouse is a Western, for example.
I mean, like,
you can do it wherever you want, whatever kind of planet you want.
And it doesn't
you
necessarily...
can take those archetypes and apply it.
I was going to say, and it doesn't necessarily need to be serialized either. It can be kind of its own thing.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Or even just follow the... I mean, that's kind of what The Mandalorian is, a gunslinger from place to place, but you're right, that's more of a Republic serialized Western.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I do have to end it there. I'm really sorry, but I want to tell everybody, Adam Lance Garcia, Heather Antos, thank you for joining me. And now I want to tell you guys what Star Wars genre I want to see done, and I bet you can't guess what it is. So one thing that I love about Star Wars is the politics.
Oh, brother.
I know most people hate Star Wars politics, but ever since this line...
The last remnants of the old Republic have been swept away.
I have been so intrigued by this aspect of the universe. I want to see some real political intrigue, maybe present the growing rebellion from the point of view of Bail Organa, or even better, show how the corruption of the New Republic led to the rise of the First Order. In the novel Bloodline, we see that there are two political parties in the New Republic, the centrists and the populists. And the centrists are wealthy core worlds who think the Empire maybe wasn't all that bad. Leia has to join with a member of the other party to discover secret underworld channels that are funding the First Order. Like, I want that story. I want to recast Princess Leia detailing the failures of this system of government. I want the leaders of a fledgling democracy to question if they even made the right choice, or if the galaxy really did deserve the Empire after all. Well, guys, that was another fun ScreenCrush video for another perfect day here in the ScreenCrush universe. Gosh, I love you guys, I love our fans, and I love my job.
Yeah, it sure is great being us.
Hey, that's ScreenCrush and Ryan Airy. You see, Paul from the Heavy Spoilers channel, I also hate small dogs because obviously I'm a bad person. Now I know something that's really gonna get them. I'm gonna send them to a far away, far distant city where they can never come back. I'm sending them to
Houston, Texas.
Well, I don't know, boss. That seems kind of mean.
Shut up or I'll give you a fresh one. Now activate the Destructo Beam.
Wow, are we in Houston, Texas? But guys, what kind of Star Wars project do you want to see? Let me know down in the comments below, or at me on Twitter, or on our free-to-join Discord server. The links for that are below. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.